Maggie the cat is alive, and so am I. Why are you so afraid of the truth? Those were words Elizabeth Taylor once said with a kind of fierce defiance, words that, looking back, now seem like a window into a life that was far more complicated than the glamorous image Hollywood sold to the world. In 1964, Elizabeth Taylor made one of the worst mistakes of her life. It wasn't a mistake on a movie set, or in her famously turbulent relationships, but one made in the quiet moments when she let her guard down. She put her trust in a journalist. For months, she met him in hotel rooms and aboard ships. They would sit together while she poured whiskey into glasses, lit her cigarettes, and began to speak about things she had never intended for the public to hear. She thought he was helping her write her memoir, and in her mind, the conversations were private, protected by that trust. But what she didn't know was that he had been secretly recording every word she said. Those recordings stayed hidden for decades, but 50 years later, they resurfaced like ghosts from a locked room. What they revealed was a side of Elizabeth Taylor the public had never truly seen. She had been living a double life. She even had a name for this other version of herself, Cellophane Elizabeth. The tapes exposed a much darker, more conflicted story than anyone had suspected, showing that behind the diamonds, the fame, and the perfume bottles with her name on them, there was a woman carrying a lifetime of secrets and scars. Elizabeth Taylor had been born on February 27, 1932, in London. From the very beginning, her life looked as if it were designed for the silver screen. Her parents, both Americans, were wealthy art dealers with refined taste and an impressive social circle. They lived in the affluent Hampstead Garden suburb, surrounded by elegance, and they ran an art gallery on London's prestigious Bond Street. Through their work, they rubbed shoulders with famous artists and influential political figures. One of these was Colonel Victor Cazalet, a man who became like an unofficial godfather to Elizabeth, offering a connection to the upper crust of British society. But even for a family that seemed so settled and successful, life changed quickly. In 1939, the world was sliding toward war. The US ambassador to the UK at the time, Joseph P. Kennedy, personally warned Elizabeth's father that it was time to get the family out of Britain. The risk was too great to stay. In April of that year, Elizabeth, her mother, and her brother boarded the SS Manhattan and left for the United States. Her father stayed behind a little longer to close the gallery before joining them. They first settled in Pasadena, California, and later in Beverly Hills. It was there that they slipped into the orbit of Hollywood's glittering social scene. Elizabeth was just 7 years old when this massive change took her from England's polished upper class to America's playground of movie stars. Elizabeth had been in the spotlight long before Hollywood took notice of her. She had started dance lessons at the age of 3, and even then, people noticed that she had something special, a rare kind of poise and charm for someone so young. She danced with a grace beyond her years, and her talent carried her to places few children could ever dream of. She once performed for none other than Princess Elizabeth, the future Queen, and Princess Margaret. Opportunities like that didn't happen by accident. Her parents' connections to high society and her mother's own past as an actress meant that doors were opened to her early. When the family relocated to Los Angeles, Elizabeth's reputation as a gifted child preceded her. Friends of the family suggested she take a Hollywood screen test, and her parents didn't hesitate to agree. After all, she had already danced for royalty. Performing for movie cameras seemed like a natural next step, as if the path to fame had always been waiting for her to take it. By the time she was 10 years old, she landed her first movie role in There's One Born Every Minute in 1942. Universal Pictures was impressed enough to sign her to a 7-year contract. But the magic didn't last long. After just one film, they decided she looked too mature for a child actress and dropped her. It was a short-sighted decision they would come to regret. MGM, however, saw what Universal missed. They snapped her up, and in doing so, they secured one of the biggest stars in cinema history. Elizabeth's career with MGM began in 1943, and the studio wasted no time in putting her to work. At 12 years old, she starred in National Velvet, 1944, playing Velvet Brown, a girl who disguises herself as a boy to compete in the Grand National Horse Race. The movie was a massive hit and became an instant classic. But behind the scenes, the role was demanding and even dangerous. To meet the physical requirements, she had to follow a strict regimen to grow taller, and during filming, she fell from her horse, suffering a back injury that would cause her pain for the rest of her life. Despite the injury, the producers rewarded her by giving her the horse from the film as a gift. The movie turned her into a household name, and MGM rewarded her with a new contract paying $750 a week, an enormous sum for a child in the 1940s. But Hollywood in those days was as controlling as it was glamorous. When Elizabeth turned 18, MGM orchestrated her first marriage not out of love, but out of business strategy. The lucky groom was Conrad Nicky Hilton Jr., heir to the Hilton Hotel fortune. The studio wanted to protect her wholesome image and market her as the perfect young woman, so they planned every detail, even purchasing her wedding dress. But the marriage, which began with a glittering ceremony, quickly became a nightmare. Hilton drank heavily, was abusive, and once kicked her so hard she lost their unborn child. After only 8 months, she divorced him, citing mental cruelty. The divorce infuriated MGM. Image was everything to the studios, and they viewed her decision as a problem. As punishment, they forced her into a forgettable romantic comedy called Love is Better Than Ever in 1952, a role far beneath her abilities. The message was clear: defy the studio, and you will suffer for it. But the same year, she starred in Ivanhoe, a film she didn't particularly care for but which became MGM's biggest hit of the year. It earned millions and proved that her name alone could draw audiences. Around that time, she married British actor Michael Wilding and was expecting her first child. To ensure financial stability, she signed a new 7-year contract with MGM worth $4,700 a week, a fortune in those days. The deal also included a house loan and promised work for Wilding, but it tied her even more tightly to a studio system that saw actors, especially women, as property. In the mid-1950s, her life took another dramatic turn. On May 12, 1956, she hosted a dinner party at her home in Benedict Canyon. It was meant to be a pleasant evening, but tragedy struck when her close friend, actor Montgomery Clift, left early and crashed his car just a few hundred yards from her driveway. Elizabeth ran barefoot to the wreck and arrived before the ambulance. Clift was choking on his own broken teeth, his face shattered. Without hesitation, she reached into his throat and cleared the debris, saving his life. But the accident left him permanently disfigured, and his career spiraled downward. Studios began to see him as a risk, and his dependence on painkillers and alcohol deepened. When MGM refused to cast him in Suddenly, last summer, 1959, Elizabeth issued an ultimatum: either they hired him or she would walk away from the film. To ease the studio's concerns, she even offered her own $500,000 salary as insurance. Thanks to her, Clift got the role, and the film earned multiple Oscar nominations. But despite her efforts, she couldn't save him forever. Clift died of a heart attack in 1966 at the age of 45, and Elizabeth was devastated. She called him her soulmate, the one person who understood her better than anyone else. Her marriage to producer Mike Todd in 1957 was one of the happiest times in her life. They had a daughter, Lisa, and Todd lavished her with extravagant gifts, including a diamond so large she wore it as a pendant. But tragedy struck again when Todd's private plane, the Lucky Liz, crashed in 1958, killing him instantly. Overwhelmed with grief, Elizabeth sought comfort in Todd's best friend, singer Eddie Fisher, who happened to be married to America's sweetheart, Debbie Reynolds. The scandal was explosive. Fisher left Reynolds for Taylor, and the media branded Elizabeth a homewrecker. Protesters followed her in public, and she received hate mail and even death threats. On May 12, 1959, just hours after Fisher's divorce was finalized, they married. But Elizabeth later admitted she had never truly loved him; he was simply a way to fill the void left by Todd's death. Their marriage quickly turned toxic. Fisher grew jealous and controlling, and when she fell in love with Richard Burton in 1961, Fisher threatened her. More than once, she woke to find him standing over her with a gun, whispering that she was too pretty to shoot. Eventually, she fled with her children. In 1961, she won her first Oscar for Butterfield 8, a film she openly disliked, and believed the award was more for surviving a near-fatal bout of pneumonia than for her acting. She had stopped breathing 4 times during the illness and undergone an emergency tracheotomy. News outlets had even mistakenly reported her death. The early 1960s brought one of the biggest Hollywood scandals of all time, her affair with Richard Burton during the filming of Cleopatra. The movie's budget spiraled to what would now be hundreds of millions, nearly bankrupting 20th Century Fox. But it wasn't the gold-covered sets that captured the world's attention, it was the firestorm of publicity surrounding Taylor and Burton's romance. Both were married to other people at the time, and a single photograph of them embracing on a yacht set off an international scandal. The Vatican accused her of erotic vagrancy, US politicians suggested banning her from the country, and security on set had to be tightened after threats were made against her. Yet Taylor and Burton were unapologetic. She divorced Fisher, and just 10 days after it was final, she married Burton in Montreal in 1964. The world was divided, some saw it as the triumph of love, others as the height of moral decay. They were the most talked-about couple of their time, the kind of romance that could stop conversations and draw headlines across the globe. Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton were not just two famous people who happened to fall in love, they were a public spectacle, a fiery and passionate storm that fascinated everyone who followed Hollywood. People had seen movie stars date before, but this was something different, louder, wilder, more intense. Taylor was already one of the most beautiful and famous women in the world, and Burton, with his deep, magnetic voice and undeniable charisma, was her equal in talent and presence. Together, they seemed larger than life, and for a time, they made the rest of the entertainment world feel small in comparison. But Elizabeth Taylor wasn't just making headlines for her love life. She was breaking records, rewriting the rules of Hollywood, and showing that a woman could have just as much financial power as any man in the business. When she took the lead role in Cleopatra in the early 1960s, she became the first actor in history, man or woman, to earn $1 million for a single film. That was unheard of. Hollywood had never paid anyone that much before. And she didn't stop there. The production of Cleopatra was a disaster in terms of scheduling. It was supposed to take 16 weeks to film, but the shoot dragged on for 2 years. Taylor had cleverly negotiated a contract that paid her $50,000 for every extra week of work, and because the delays kept stacking up, she ended up making nearly $7 million from that single movie. Adjusted for today's money, that's around $60 million. On top of that, she had negotiated a percentage of the film's profits, something no star had ever managed to get before her. This wasn't just luck, it was strategy. Taylor's business sense was as sharp as her screen presence. She famously negotiated parts of her Cleopatra deal from her bathtub, dictating terms to her then-husband Eddie Fisher, who passed them along to the studio. When the executives at 20th Century Fox finally agreed, she toasted the moment with champagne. That single deal changed the way Hollywood paid its stars forever, paving the way for future actors to demand profit-sharing and record-breaking salaries. She had shattered the glass ceiling for women in the film industry, and she had done it with style and confidence. While Elizabeth was changing the business side of Hollywood, Richard Burton was falling deeply under her spell. His private diaries, written during the height of their romance, revealed an obsession that went far beyond public displays of affection. He described her beauty in ways that were raw, poetic, and unfiltered. He called her fantastically beautiful and spoke of a special and dangerous loveliness that drew him in. He wrote about her body in vivid detail, from her lips to her figure, and once famously described her as beautiful beyond the dreams of pornography, a phrase that shocked some but perfectly captured the intensity of his attraction. For Burton, being away from her was physically painful. He described it as an ache in his stomach when they were apart. He admitted that she had made him a better man, but he also recognized that he was completely under her control, powerless against her charm. To the outside world, they were glamorous and fiery, but his words painted a picture of a man consumed by love, passion, and desire. In 1966, Elizabeth Taylor stunned the world again, not with her beauty this time, but by transforming herself into a character completely different from the glamorous image she had built. At just 33 years old, she gained 30 pounds, aged herself with makeup, and allowed herself to look frumpy, bitter, and vicious for her role in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. Audiences who had always seen her as a glamorous star were shocked by the change. But her risk paid off. The film earned 13 Oscar nominations and won 5, including her second Academy Award for Best Actress. All four main actors in the film were nominated for Oscars, something that had never happened before. The raw, brutal story about a broken marriage broke rules in American cinema, tackling adult themes with a realism that was rare at the time. In 2013, the Library of Congress preserved the film as a culturally significant piece of American history. It was proof that Elizabeth was willing to risk everything for her art, even her carefully cultivated image. Off-screen, though, her personal life was as intense and dramatic as her performances. Her marriage to Richard Burton was famously volatile. They loved each other fiercely, but their fights were equally explosive. Friends who witnessed their arguments often didn't know whether to try to calm them down or to leave the room entirely. Burton once described in his diary a fight in 1969 when Taylor, drunk and furious, smashed him in the head with her ring-covered fingers. He wrote, "If any man had done that, I'd have killed him." Their arguments covered everything from drunkenness to jealousy to greed. Alcohol was a constant presence in their relationship, and it fueled many of their worst moments. Burton wrote about how Taylor would sometimes go to bed stoned, speaking in a baby voice like a demented child. They started drinking early in the day, often at breakfast, and didn't stop until they collapsed at night. Taylor herself admitted to mixing Jack Daniels with Demerol while in the hospital, saying it left her higher than a kite. Conversations between them could become impossible. She was often too impaired to follow what was being said. The drinking, along with their clashing personalities, nearly destroyed them. By June 1974, their first divorce was finalized. Burton was devastated. In his diary, he wrote, "This woman is my life." The split was front-page news around the world, but they couldn't stay away from each other. Just 16 months later, they remarried in Botswana. Taylor wore a green dress with feathers, and Burton wore a red shirt and red socks. The ceremony lasted just 20 minutes, followed by champagne by the river. Fans hoped this meant they had finally found peace, but it didn't last. Within 9 months, the second marriage fell apart. By February 1976, they had separated again, and by July, the divorce was finalized. The same old problems, alcohol, jealousy, explosive arguments, had returned. Their love was legendary, but it was not enough to overcome the chaos. After Burton, Elizabeth married John Warner in 1976. At first, she supported his political career, helping him win a seat in the U.S. Senate. Crowds often came just to see her, and she brought Hollywood glamour to Washington. But life in politics was very different from Hollywood. Elizabeth felt trapped, bored, and isolated. Washington society could be rigid and conservative, and she sometimes rebelled in small ways, like wearing purple to a Republican ladies' lunch after being told not to. She described that period of her life as boring and lonely. By December 1981, she and Warner had separated, and by November 1982, they divorced. Her health and emotional state suffered badly during that marriage. Depression set in, and she began gaining weight, which drew cruel comments from the media. More dangerously, she turned increasingly to pills and alcohol. Between 1983 and 1988, 3 doctors prescribed her over 1,000 prescriptions for 28 different drugs. The doses were so extreme that one expert who later reviewed her medical records said he couldn't believe she was still alive. She mixed whiskey with Demerol, took sleeping pills and Valium at night, and sometimes woke up so disoriented that she walked into walls. She later admitted that without help, she would have died. That help came from her family, her children, her brother, and her longtime friend Roddy McDowell, who staged an intervention. They begged her to get treatment, and after one final night of drinking, she agreed. In December 1983, she checked into the Betty Ford Center for a 7-week stay. She admitted publicly, "I'm Elizabeth, and I'm an addict and an alcoholic." It was a humbling experience. She shared a room, did chores, and participated in group therapy. But the program saved her life, and her openness about her struggles inspired others to seek help as well. Through all of this, Elizabeth revealed something many people never guessed. She drank not because she was outgoing, but because she was shy. "I'm terribly shy," she once said. "I drink for courage." But the same alcohol that gave her confidence also made her feel worse in the long run, and because she could drink heavily without showing obvious signs of intoxication, her dependency only deepened. For more than 50 years, a hidden part of Elizabeth Taylor's story sat quietly in an attic. Over 40 hours of private interviews recorded between 1964 and 1965 by journalist Richard Merriman, who had been ghostwriting her memoir. These sessions took place in hotel suites, on ocean liners, and in smoke-filled rooms, with drinks flowing freely. She believed she was speaking off the record much of the time, often telling him, "You can't use that in the book." Because she felt in control, she spoke with complete honesty. She talked about her regrets over failed marriages, her heartbreak with Eddie Fisher, and the pain of living under constant public scrutiny. She even discussed private moments with James Dean and the abuse she endured during her first marriage, stories that never made it into her published autobiography. The tapes remained hidden until after Merriman's death in 2015, when his widow discovered them. In 2019, the Elizabeth Taylor estate reclaimed the recordings, and in 2024, they became the centerpiece of the HBO documentary Elizabeth Taylor, The Lost Tapes. For the first time, people could hear Taylor's unguarded voice, full of vulnerability, humor, and pain. Director Nanette Burstein later said Taylor would never have spoken so openly if she had known the world would one day hear those words. Beneath her glamour, Elizabeth often felt like a fraud. She told Merriman she lived as two people: the private Elizabeth, a flesh-and-blood woman her family knew, and the cellophane Elizabeth, the Hollywood creation seen by millions but truly known by no one. The real Elizabeth longed for love and a normal life, while the cellophane Elizabeth smiled for the cameras and endured endless gossip. This split personality was her way of surviving fame. In 1985, her life took a turn toward activism when her close friend Rock Hudson died of AIDS. At the time, the disease was surrounded by fear, ignorance, and stigma, and most celebrities stayed far away from the subject. But Taylor refused to be silent. She co-founded the Foundation for AIDS Research, AMFAR, and began speaking publicly about the disease when few others would. She raised nearly $325 million for research, supported over 2,000 scientists worldwide, and in 1991, created the Elizabeth Taylor AIDS Foundation to provide direct care for patients. She fought against discriminatory policies, visited patients in hospitals, and even testified before Congress. Her courage helped change how the world saw HIV/AIDS, making her one of the most important celebrity activists of her time. Elizabeth was also a savvy businesswoman outside of Hollywood. In 1987, she launched her first perfume, Passion, followed in 1991 by White Diamonds, which became one of the best-selling celebrity fragrances in history. By 2018, White Diamonds had generated $1.5 billion in sales, and even after her death, a portion of the profits continues to support her AIDS foundation. Her perfume empire ultimately made her wealthier than her acting career ever had, with her estate valued between $600 million and $1 billion when she passed away. Her final marriage was to Larry Fortensky, a construction worker she met while they were both in rehab at the Betty Ford Center. He was 20 years younger, and their wedding in 1991 took place at Michael Jackson's Neverland Ranch. The marriage lasted until 1996, and though it didn't work out, Taylor described it as one of her simpler, more genuine relationships, free from Hollywood's pressures. Elizabeth Taylor died on March 23, 2011, at the age of 79, surrounded by her 4 children. Her death marked the end of an era, but her legacy, both as a movie star and as a humanitarian, continues to inspire. She was more than just a face on a screen. She was a fighter, a survivor, a business pioneer, and a woman who used her fame to change the world.